If there's one thing which has kept me going amongst the challenges of Space Year 2020, it's the joy of watching developers continuing to push classic gaming platforms to their limits and beyond. Most of the time, it's simply by introducing modern design sensibilities and mechanics into classic genres. Other times, it's the focus on pushing hardware with new tricks to bring new experiences into one's gaming space. But can fancy technical tricks serve as the be-all and end-all for the modern independent developer? Well, that's what we come to with one Arkagis Revolution. This is Beyond the Scanlines, a series focusing on interesting games on classic computing and gaming platforms. It's the year 2612, and Arkagis, a nation situated on Mars, is gripped under the rule of a tyrannical dictator. Though, when the forces of the United Space Colonies arrive, it should have been seen as a grand day for liberation. Instead, they were out to claim Arkagis for themselves, all because Arkagis, unsurprisingly, just happens to be rich with resources just waiting to be exploited. And they say history doesn't repeat itself, eh? Behind the scenes, a small rebellion group plots to free their country, and this is where you come in as Lynn, ace pilot, and one tasked with piloting a new fighter to dismantle the USC forces and their commander Victor. On starting out, you'll be placed into a tutorial mission, letting you get familiarised with the craft which you'll fly into battle. Prior to this starting, you may think Arkagis Revolution is going to be a run-of-the-mill shmup, but you'd be wrong. So very wrong. Arkagis Revolution is very much built up around its unique selling point, the overhead rotating view, similar to what could be achieved using Mode 7 on the Super NES. But on the Mega Drive here, this is all done using pure grunt. No hardware chipset assistance here. The rotation may throw you off, at least initially, which probably is also bolstered by the reduced game window which is needed for this all to happen. Thankfully, the tutorial helps in controlling your craft, especially with the flexible control setup on offer. For most players, a 6-button controller is going to be the best way to enjoy the game, as it gives you quick access to everything you need. From easily selecting your weapons, to moving and rotating your ship, it fits well and is plenty responsive. Each mission offers an initial briefing in text form, before a small sequence involving Lynn communicating with Mika, the Resistance's engineer, or Commander Gennari, the head of the forces, before you start out.
Commander here, this is an enemy warehouse. According to our report,
quite impressively, these pieces are conducted using both text and voice, and in fact rather clear voice at that, putting it well above many other titles on the Mega Drive on the sound front for that alone. The operation to dismantle the UCS takes place over 5 missions. Initially, you'll be on the hunt for a special weapon which the Resistance will adapt for your own use. Next up, you'll be taking out their operations to harvest Arkagis' resources. From there, you'll take out their storage plants, then one of their major weapons factories. The final operation has you taking the fight to the UCS's main hub, where you'll confront Victor and finally put a stop to the UCS rule of Arkagis. Each mission is broken up into multiple sections. Some require you to simply just navigate a region of the map and get to the exit point. For others, you'll need to locate a specific target to collect or take out before you do the same. Unsurprisingly, the last section of a mission usually involves you taking the fight to a larger enemy unit, mostly controlled by a recurring nuisance in Ricard, one of the UCS's top pilots. These fights usually are a case of learning to outmaneuver the enemy craft and dish out as much damage as possible, all without taking on too much of your own. Thankfully, even if you do take a hit or two, your fighter can sustain quite a bit of damage before it gives up the ghost, which typically results in you being put back at the last checkpoint you crossed. Or when you haven't encountered any, it'll be the start of the current section. This is actually quite a fair game in that regard, as for these larger stages where you'll have to find them, checkpoints are plentiful and easy to identify. As for the stages involving boss fights, you'll pretty much just go into that fight right from the start. So if you do get taken out, you won't be set too far back, and it gives you that feeling of wanting that one more go to see if you can topple them on your next attempt before you get back to the rest of the game.
Don't you like freedom?
Something else which helps greatly is the password system. Bringing up the in-game auto map at any point will display a 6-digit code which will start you back at the beginning of the current section of the mission or the most recent checkpoint you've passed. Now, when it comes to dealing out destruction, your fighter has 3 weapon systems available. Your base weapon is the phaser, a weak rapid-fire blast. It's also the only weapon you can upgrade in the course of the game to the wide phaser, and this just increases the damage each shot can do. The first additional weapon you'll acquire is the homing shots. These will arc from your fighter to the closest enemy. Now, these can be incredibly handy to use, but there are times when this little feature can make things a bit trickier by the shots focusing on indestructible enemies or targets which are out of reach. Finally though, you can install the blaster. This one fires a large energy bolt which can blast through doors or even through multiple enemies with one burst. It is, however, a rather slow projectile, and recharging for another shot can take some time. So whilst it's very handy against the tough static enemies you may run into, it's not so much the case for swarms of smaller ones, unless you're lucky with some precise targeting. As for the enemies the USC will throw at you, you're primarily going to be dealing with a mixture of tanks, flyers and turrets. Though the tanks and flyers are mostly trivial to take out, really only requiring a few shots from the base phaser, getting them in range and lining them up can be more of a challenge, thanks to, again, to that view size. You'll typically see their shots before they'll come into frame, and you can use this to position yourself and both dodge incoming fire, then line up to let a few shots off in order to take them out. The turrets are a little tougher to handle, and so getting a grip on this technique is probably even more important as a result. Thank goodness your fighter just has some amazing agility when in flight. Am I right? The levels do also include other hazards. Mostly these come in the form of mines, which can take a good chunk of your craft's energy out. Later on, there are also mobile hazards, in the form of sparks and even some rotating gates, which you'll have to negotiate, particularly in the 4th mission. These really put the focus on your piloting more than your firepower in order to get through unscathed. Whilst the game offers plenty of visual variety in the locations you'll encounter for each of the missions, the objectives themselves tend to be a bit repetitive. The only reason this really sticks out is that the difficulty curve is kind of flat. I found that until reaching Victor at the end of the game, it really didn't get significantly harder as I moved through the missions. It's fair to say that for some players this may impact replayability, though there are ways which the game compensates for this, like the addition of a speedrunning mode. This activates a timer showing you how long you've been playing for, so once you've beaten the story, you can go back and see just how much faster you can complete the missions and free the people of Arkagis. Now let's move away from the mechanics and talk about the rest of the game. From a visual angle, the art style is clear, crisp and detailed. The designs of the craft, both your fighter and the USC forces, all stand out quite nicely from the backgrounds and have a distinct sense of character about them. Considering the trickery used to simulate these rotation effects on the Mega Drive hardware, the final result is quite smooth with very little slowdown, at least until the late game. It's there, but I didn't really find it enough to throw a player off their game, even when playing on a PAL Mega Drive as I was doing here for the sake of capture. Your mileage may vary as to whether or not you can stand the restricted play area. Thankfully, this was enlarged from demos released earlier in development. The fact is, without this restriction, the game wouldn't run anywhere near as well as it does, particularly as the Mega Drive just doesn't have those rotation capabilities as seen in its rival. Though even with these slowdowns, it comes off much smoother than the only other game I've seen on the Mega Drive to try this kind of trickery, Red Zone. Whilst that offers a little more visual detail in things, the result lacks the smoothness which Arkagis brings, and it makes the decisions to go down this path more than worth it for the sake of playability. Something else which also shines are the cutscene visuals. Though you primarily only see these within the intro and outro sequences, the art style works well here, and the full screen sequences with their palette choices do make the results pop out. Jumping over to audio, there's a lot done here which is most excellently put together. I've already spoken about the clarity of the voice clips used in those pre-mission sequences, but it is worth showcasing again. There is some great acting on offer here, particularly from a cast of 2 performers. Each character on offer is distinct in their vocal delivery, and it really contributes to the game's story having it presented in this manner. Along with that, you get a solid assortment of sound effects for the events you'll experience. Items like UI selections, the briefing and other indications, plus weapons fire, explosions and more. It builds up a soundscape which brings the challenge of battle right to the forefront. This is also bolstered by the soundtrack. What is on offer here is a series of pieces that truly fit the situations quite well. From the relaxed nature of taking a training run, to breaching and battling your way through an industrial complex, and exploring the Arkagan deserts, or having to battle one of those larger boss weapons platforms. There's a great variety of tunes on offer, and they contribute to the atmosphere quite excellently. Something else I found quite impressive is the customization on offer. Alongside staples like adjusting your difficulty level or rebinding your controller buttons, you can adjust your craft's rotation speed, customize the HUD style, and more. Speaking of control options, supporting an inverted layout may not seem that special in the scale of things, but for some folk I'm sure it's going to come in very handy. But what's more unique is the support for the Mega Drive mouse, and along with that, a custom interface which will let you connect a Saturn keyboard. You heard me right, keyboard and mouse on a Mega Drive game. Now that is something you don't see every day. It does make sense though, especially when it comes to dealing with the bosses, where circle strafing techniques are quite handy, and while they're doable on a control pad, using a mouse and keyboard to get that bit more precision makes the experience even smoother. It really is the little things like this which make a game stand out that bit further and be a bit more special as a result. Arkagis Revolution has been a title which I've been looking forward to for a seriously long time. And, as it has to be said, was it worth the wait? It absolutely was. Though the mission count may have made it significantly smaller than your average modern release, it works out quite well, as though the difficulty curve is a little flat, it does make it highly replayable. Because, much like a good movie, you can dive right in, have a solid session, and have a great time, all without losing too much of your life. And all of these expectations being weighed down without an incredibly lengthy story, well, it's a fresh alternative in these days of modern gaming, and the experiences which AAA titles put on offer there. If you're after a different slice of blasting action for your Mega Drive, it's absolutely worth the pickup. Or perhaps you just want to see how far a 32-year-old system like the Mega Drive can be pushed in terms of its capabilities, then for sure it's one you should check out as well. The technical mastery on offer is well up there, and it's certainly a title which can stand proud amongst the gems of modern development on Sega's blast processing capable beast. And with that, it's time to draw this episode to a close. If you've enjoyed the video, why not hit the thumbs up and consider letting your friends know about the show. Word of mouth can be incredibly helpful for smaller channels in this day and age. For more laid back, respectful examinations of titles new and old for classic systems, then consider hitting the subscribe button if you haven't already, and be ready for doses of insightful looks to hit your subscription feed soon. Most importantly, thank you all for taking the time out for another voyage beyond the Scanlines.